Video game dialogue. It's an art form that is so invaluable in many games, a hallmark of world building, and also an aspect that many people view with disdain. Since the beginning of the industry, video games have used writers to flesh out their worlds, guide players through tutorials, and build stories that are expertly woven into immersive experiences. Words are, whether noticeable or not, the foundation of how we perceive many of the biggest games in the world. From vibrant and whole characters in games like Zelda and Pokemon to simple, clear narratives in the Mario series, the backbone we find again and again in the most celebrated pieces of media is good writing. That is, however, a concept that is uniquely hard to realize in the realm of video game production. What even is good writing when the enjoyment of a video game comes from so many different moving parts? What differentiates a badly written game character from those that change series from good to great? Some dialogue we see in modern games can be unforgettable, movie-like, and story-defining. Other pieces feel unnecessary, bland, and intrusive during gameplay. The grammar may be fine, the sentence is easy to read, but it just doesn't reach the peak we wish it did. The usual excitement for cutscenes is dimmed when they feel long, drawn out, and underwhelming after hours of build-up, and characters fall flat in the midst of an epic world. So how do we quantify a good game script when nothing's wrong with it? Well, unluckily for you, I'm about to rant about video game dialogue like I've cornered you at a house party. Let's take a deeper, annoying look at video game writing and the careful task of doing it right. Quick disclaimer here, for this essay, I zeroed in on a lot of Nintendo titles specifically to give a baseline to compare upon. Nintendo is Nintendo, and I use it as our control group here, but they obviously aren't the developer of massive, groundbreaking titles like Baldur's Gate and Elden Ring. Those games are feats of their genre, and this video is about a very generalized, mass-market look at game dialogue. The purpose of this video is to be an accessible zoom-in on game writing and where it can fail, not to tell you that all video games fail at this and your favorite one sucks. It's a dissection, not a dismissal of the good, and I'm just a little guy. Please don't nail me to a cross for discussing Mario. Thank you. Okay, let's go. As always, we're going to begin the shit show with a bit of background and some fundamentals. Video game writing, at its simplest, can be split into two main categories: narrative design and script writing. Narrative design focuses on world building and plot creation, which is what we see at the base of a game. These writers not only focus on the actual background building of the game, but also how mechanics and the user experience will be communicated into an actual product. Narrative designers are responsible for the very feel of a game. I know it sounds like I'm sucking the narrative team's dick here, but they are actually just very cool. Think of them as the ghost writers of the video game world, the unseen heroes if you want to be fucky about it. Script writers take the reins of what most people initially perceive as video game writing. These people work to make the top layer of a video game fit into place. Writers of traditional forms of media, like books and movies, would be a combination of both of these roles at once, but video games in particular require a lot more in-depth crafting and creative collaboration to work. Sometimes these roles will be combined into a singular one, but that often makes for a rockier development. If you want to put me into a blender by now for talking too much about the semantics, that means I'm doing this right. So, now that you're acquainted with how video game writing is brought in by the storks, you've probably started thinking of a few examples of games with a heavy amount of dialogue. Many story-based games use cutscenes to separate the actual playtime from more movie-like, reading-rich portions of the game. You'll be pulled away to watch the characters you've been playing alongside talk amongst themselves, add context to the story, and provide a link to connect with the plot itself. It's a way to turn your focus away from the doing aspect of a game and position you as more of an observer. You probably already know what a cutscene is, but hey, I'm just a funny little video essay guy, that's all. Cutscenes are where we often see the guts of a video game, ripped out and shown on display. Pivotal moments in the story are separated from the mechanical aspects to allow you to allocate your time to taking in the narrative progression. You're not usually slashing things or mashing buttons while the main character is having an emotional heart-to-heart with you, and I'm sure you can glean why. This dialogue is almost always where the bullet points of the story are conveyed rather than in between sprinkled in with normal gameplay. They're what you'll remember from your experience. For example, if you played Pokemon Violet, you probably remember the general outline of the game's plot, but not much of the one-off dialogue. A big emotional ending will stick to you more often than not because it was presented to you as an explosive scene. They're designed to help you get the gist of things if you don't want to read every little speech blurb that comes your way. Of course, cutscenes aren't the only time dialogue is found in a video game, or we wouldn't be here right now. Maybe I would have a better life, I don't know. Bits and pieces of writing are dispersed around the game, usually to build up a character's personality, provide helpful tips and guide the player through the actual gameplay, or to further the story in small increments. These are, more often than not, either delivered through a narrator or an NPC. It's usually fairly negligible to the completion of the game and isn't a means of communicating pivotal information. All of these forms of writing come together to create a full story. They're puzzle pieces that outline, execute, and expand the core of a game into an immersive experience. Whenever you connect with a character from a game franchise, it's because of the way they were sculpted by a writer. So, if this writing is so instrumental to a game, why do so many people skip over the dialogue as much as they can? Why can you play a game without reading half of the dialogue and still come out satisfied with it? Well, first of all, it can be boring as hell. I know that kind of seems to go against everything I said before, but in truth, it doesn't. Writing is 100% an instrumental piece to making a good narrative-based game if it's done right, and that doesn't end at having a quote-unquote good writer. Sure, it starts there, but it doesn't end there. The concept of a good character is fairly nebulous, but we're gonna go with the general definition of a good character being well-written, intriguing, and multifaceted. You want to create a character that has intrigue, whether through relatability, likability, or interest, and we want them to be deep enough that learning more about them feels like a journey rather than a destination. Cheesy way to put that, but it's true. They need to be separate from the crowd and have their own distinct voices while also being allowed to seem imperfect and human. When these points aren't hit, the character can start to feel small, insignificant, and annoying in the scope of the story itself. It's a question of why they're even there, and in some cases, why you should care about them. I say in some cases because villains can kind of work on a case-by-case basis with this. They need intrigue, but sometimes that can be followed by lovability or motivation. If the dialogue itself falls flat, it gives you no grip to latch onto. If you have no grip on the character, they fall into the background and start to feel like a waste of your time. When a character is given attention and fleshed out fully, they give you a reason to put energy into understanding them. You actually want to explore them as a person and uncover their motivations. You connect with them because they're them, not out of force by the story. This is hard to do, and it takes an experienced scriptwriter, dedication, and a certain amount of time given in-game to that character to allow them to spread their wings. When putting these rules into a video game, things get significantly more difficult to execute. The main focus of a game is to, play the fucking game, and the more time that is given to the characters, the less time you're allowed to explore the mechanics and complete objectives. Something here has to be given the right of way, and it usually isn't fleshing out the characters. This can be a significant problem in cutscene-heavy games, where the process of pulling you out of the gameplay actually ends up doing the opposite of what it's intended to do and disrupts the flow of the game itself. You're now focused on getting back to the involved, action-heavy portion of the game, and the dialogue starts to feel like you're getting lectured. It can be an unnatural transition, and that makes the story less interesting. No matter how well-written your character is, if they feel like an intrusion, you're obviously gonna be angry at them. Their purpose may be clear, but when they stick out as a distraction, it's ugly. This faux pas isn't the case for every character, clearly, or franchises like Zelda just wouldn't exist. The most beloved video games, the ones that win awards for both innovation and writing, rely on one thing. That is the symbiosis of story and gameplay. It's important here to understand what the role of a story is and how much jurisdiction it has over the entire game. Not all games are story-based, and that's why I've been making that distinction this whole time. If your favorite video game of all time has little to no character focus and is mostly combat, that is not the type of game I'm talking about, to be clear. There is a time when writing is unnecessary and distracting versus when it needs to be there and is done incorrectly. For example, adding a long storyline into a FIFA game would defeat the reason most people play it. There's a time and a place for everything. Anyway, story, mechanics, symbiosis, blah blah blah, motherfucker, what do I mean by that? The concept is most easily identified by the lack of it, because you've probably experienced it before. In my opinion, some of the recent Pokemon games are very egregious examples of its absence. I am a Switch Pokemon game defender till I die, but even I can see the issues with games like Sword and Shield, for example. The Sword and Shield storyline focuses on the quest to defeat Chairman Rose, one of the game's villains, and stop the triggering of an event known as the Darkest Day. Ooh. Chairman Rose plans to use this event to stop an ongoing power crisis that has been plaguing the Galar region. You, alongside your rival Hop and some other characters, explore the world and foil Chairman Rose. That's, of course, a major oversimplification of the plot if you haven't played the game, but it's enough to get you settled if you need it. Pokemon mainline games almost always follow the same convention: defeat each gym leader, earn your badges, and become the next champion. This acts as the anchor of the series, and each subsequent installment adds a story which weaves through that objective. A lot of Pokemon games are known for their incredible storylines, but Sword and Shield particularly fell short in this area. It lacked what the other games have in abundance: a connecting web that combines the objective with the story. The looming threat of the Darkest Day is shown to you as an almost far-off figure, not being fleshed out until you near the end of the game. It's almost as if you're playing two separate narratives, the Pokemon champion and the Galarian hero, but the latter is an overheard conversation. You don't really get the opportunity to understand Chairman Rose as a character from your point of view. His entire character is locked off. He could be replaced with anyone else and the story would still be able to be told. There's nothing unique about him, it's just a block of text. His dialogue is stale and lacks emotion, and the urgency of the plot's obstacles is left out when they are so important to fostering empathy for the in-game world. There's nothing given to you about these characters that drives you to learn more, to connect with them, to understand their side of the story. When characters aren't allowed to mesh with the world around them, they become completely unnecessary. The dialogue in many of the cutscenes, which we spend entire portions of the game waiting for, doesn't give us any introspective view of the situation or a satisfying building block. It lacks the oomph and story relevance that it needs to stand out. When characters aren't fun to listen to and aren't intertwined with the story at all, what is their purpose? I'll give you a hint. It doesn't exist. Anyway, in order to properly meet that symbiosis, your dialogue needs to A, have a foundation of intriguing characters to work off of, and B, lean into the game's objectives and mechanics. When you introduce a character with those original principles of goodness that I told you about, it provides a jumping off point to get the player engaged. It acts as a clutch to get your attention to shift to that character so it doesn't feel wasted. But when the mechanic integration falls flat, it'll feel like a laborious process to actually absorb that information in the first place. If you splice in cutscenes that feel as action-packed as the gameplay and have a solid build-up, they will act as a reward rather than an interruption. The base for that is accomplished by making the more minor dialogue pieces a part of a big whole, rather than leaving them as standalone instances that mean nothing. You want each line to either add to the character's personality or add intrigue to them, which will culminate in that giant, explosive cutscene at major plot events. This build-up needs to be so good that even though you can complete the main objective of the story without these characters, it would feel wrong to. They have to feel like a part of the world you're saving. Create unanswered questions, make characters have a real role in the story. Their existence becomes natural and wanted when your curiosity about them is rewarded, and you have to foster that curiosity in the first place. In terms of Zelda, from, The Legend of, you begin with plenty of questions. The plot is incredibly strong, and you're placed in a position where finding out more about this mysterious character feels like a treat. Each piece of the game is designed to carve out a place for more lore. Of course, Link doesn't speak, but he doesn't need to. The other characters can still play off of him perfectly. Yes, this is my way of announcing that I finally played a Zelda game, okay? What's your point? I didn't grow up with game consoles, leave me alone. Anyway, that initial unknown is what catapults you into wanting to know more and gets you acquainted with the story itself. The other important part I mentioned was meshing dialogue with the game's mechanics. Exploring the gameplay should feel like it's unlocking more and more about the people that live within that world and why you want to take part in it. For example, in one of my favorite games ever, Slay the Princess, you are tasked with, well, slaying the princess. Wow! But it isn't as simple as that. You're presented with a sketchy narrator who pushes you to slay an innocent-seeming woman and a princess that supposedly has the capability to end the world, as well as the voices tugging you in 10 different directions. Your choices and your conversations matter and lead you down a different facet of the story each time, never letting you go down the same rabbit hole twice. Each chapter provides more and more insight into these characters, giving you a reason to continue and a reward for looking deeper. The dialogue fuels your actions, and your actions are met with more lore. It's the perfect example of game writing meaning something, and although it is a visual novel, which is like all writing, those same principles can be applied to any story-based game. Basically, the progression of a character should intertwine with the progression of the actual gameplay. You learn more about the game itself, you complete more of it, you learn more about the characters, right? Cool. But wait, not all games that have dialogue are story-based. What about titles like Animal Crossing? Okay, here we are. I've already talked about Animal Crossing's dialogue at length, so if you want a more in-depth look at that, feel free to watch my deep dive there. But in this scenario, I'm going to use Animal Crossing as a standee for games of a similar nature. Titles without full-on stories per se, but a cast of lovable characters that aid you on your quest, or just fill dead air in some scenarios. We have a very interesting case with the Animal Crossing series because, like Pokemon, there are examples of this being done well and this being done poorly. In older titles like Wild World or Population Growing, we see these villagers reach their full potential. They meet their mark of adding vibrancy and reality into the game. They feel like real townsfolk. Our reward in this scenario is much like it is in a story-based game. We get to know the characters, we get to feel like we are actually friends with them and form actual connections. The concept of a reward that I've been talking about this whole time is shifted into companionship rather than story completion. We have to treat this experience like getting to know a real-life friend, hearing about their life, what makes them the way that they are, and connecting with them. The goal of making a friend in person isn't to fulfill a story, but to know somebody, and that's what Animal Crossing excels in. The original ones, anyway. The dialogue in New Horizons lives in stagnation, it lacks depth, and it just overlaps and overlaps until you've heard it a million times. When you are subjected to repeated, bare-bones conversations about nothing, you never really progress in that relationship, and that's a huge part of why Animal Crossing is what it is. The end goal in the original series was knowing your villagers, but the dialogue doesn't allow that. It becomes completely obsolete within a few days. The original Animal Crossing installments excelled in how they showcased character development. It's what made the idea of this town sim work. It was a rewarding thing. It was an objective in and of itself to know people. So with all of those examples coming together, we can see two clear things come to light. Number one, there's a lot of nuance in game writing, and number two, this is all too complicated, why should I care? Well, first of all, there are plenty of games that have done this concept complete justice. There are people who have dedicated their lives to understanding how to properly make a video game work. There are millions of stories that are just skipped over every single time because of these rules that I've told you. That doesn't mean you can't force yourself to enjoy it. The purpose of video game writing, whether narrative or script, lies in creating an immersive, unforgettable experience for the player. It not only congratulates your effort and the development of your skills, but it puts the entire experience into something that is far easier for us to absorb: a story. There's nothing quite like the medium of video games. They're still so new, and we're learning more about how to perfect them every single day. It's a miracle that we have so many perfect stories already. In games, not only are you watching a plot unfold, but you are a part of it. You experience it through the lens of an involved party. There are some people who will never look at video game dialogue. They'll never care about a video game story, but if you're one of those people, I encourage you deeply to give it a chance. Even if a story isn't perfected yet, it is still worth reading. It is still worth letting into your brain and acknowledging it and looking through it like a book. In my opinion, it is always worth it to consume as many stories as possible, even if they are not fantastic. Allow yourself to take lessons from the mundane and put feeling into things that may not seem to deserve it. Human lives are not polished, perfected, and edited, but they are still loved. and you can give video games like that a chance as well. There are a million more reasons to read the dialogue than to skip it. Even if it feels tiresome and boring, you will learn something from it, even if it's just what you like and don't like in a video game. Good writing is there for a reason. Bad writing is there for a reason. In any case, we will keep growing, we will keep creating, and things will be more and more beautiful over time. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and thank you to all of the people in the field who have cataloged their experiences. They were instrumental in making this video work. All of the write-ups I referenced will be linked in the description below. I highly recommend you check them out. Obviously, this entire piece is just my own opinion pretty much because I'm annoying and like to talk about how I feel, but I wanted to use this as an intersection between what I do for work and what I do for fun, writing and video games. I am not in the field myself, and I would not have been able to make this video without people telling me what the field is like. If you are a narrative designer or a scriptwriter, please let me know how I did. Tell me if there's anything that could be changed about this video that I should know for the future. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to all of my members for supporting me. Stay safe, stay wonderful, my friends, and I will see you next time. Goodbye!